People tend to not like High School of the Dead very much, and it's understandable why. When your show markets panty shots, balls to the wall action, and gravity-defying tit physics as its main selling points, eyebrows are often raised from more casual viewing audiences, and even the ones with more experience within the anime community as a whole. Although I can't really disagree with many of the common negative points that are thrown against High School of the Dead, for some reason for me, it remains as one of my favourite anime. If you'd ask me why that is, there's probably a lot of it that just relates to nostalgia, but there are a lot of legitimate points that I actually do think give the show credit overall. One of the lesser ones, or at least one of the ones that I barely see when it comes to general discussion, is the show's soundtrack, and by that I don't actually mean the collection of songs that come at the end credits of every episode from Mon Kurosaki. Sure, each one of those tracks from that collective album is fucking fantastic, but I feel for the sake of this video it would be too easy to give all the credit to them. Instead, I wanted to talk about the actual score pieces, more specifically on the OST, with credit to Sayo Fukunaga and Wara Takashi. The more somber pieces on this score work really well with the sometimes haunting visuals provided, and they're something that almost no one talks about. Before we get into the scene itself, there's an important overarching factor that comes into play when it comes to High School of the Dead as a zombie medium, and this is something that comes back around and intertwines with how well they are able to use the soundtrack and the visuals together. Something that I feel is constantly overlooked is the series' ability to almost expertly convey the pandemonium upon first outbreak. This is something that a lot of zombie fiction tends to skip over, but for many viewers this is the most exciting part. I can understand that for a lot of writers they probably feel pressured into info dumping and explaining the why and how of the infection, but a lot of the time it works better just to drop the viewer right in the middle of it.
Dude, this is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly what I wanted. Like, you see that one encounter and it's bad, and then you just drive by a bunch of normal people just getting into their cars.
Yeah, it's just...
Right? And it's nice and subdued. And
the opening stage of The Last of Us is a great example of setting a stage that is so demanding on a player or viewer that they have no choice but to fall into the panic themselves. Of course, most of this can be attributed to the characters and the emotions that the voice actors give them, but there's a lot to be said on how they use soundtrack here, even in the most minimal way, to boost those really tear-jerking moments.
Oh no. Sarah. Move your hands, babe. I know, baby, I know. Listen to me, I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right, I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby, I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby, I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Come on. No. No. No, no, please. Please, please, please don't. Please.
There's a lot that can be said and done in both the scene and a series by properly contrasting moments of high tension and panic only to switch back to moments of subtlety, sorrow, and atmospheres of the eerily peaceful, and this goes a really long way in any zombie fiction. The background strings in this particular scene, accompanied by the short guitar strums and picks, are beautifully placed. Needless to say that the sound team behind this particular scene absolutely killed it with the placement of this particular song. High School of the Dead, although arguably a little bit less elegant in its presentation, hits the same kind of buttons that The Last of Us does when it comes to the opening and those first floodgates of the infection. This is not me trying to say that High School of the Dead and The Last of Us are the same or even comparable on the same level, but what I am saying is that they do manage to hit a lot of the same notes when it comes to how they display their themes through soundtrack and otherwise. As a series, High School of the Dead takes time exploring those themes and experimenting with them as well. The idea of things changing in an instant, people and landscapes that you once knew so well now being cluttered in panic or stripped clean in waves of violence. These ideas cobbled together with the fact that our main characters in the show are all now high school students, dealing with their own interpersonal growth and hormones, so you end up getting some really nice and unexpected moments reflecting all of those factors combined. I'm not trying to suck cock and say that it was some genius move to make the characters high schoolers, especially considering that character design comes from a hentai artist. But there are themes of adolescence and looking at the lens of humanity from this perspective which feed into the emotions of the characters and the overall atmosphere of the show that are often overlooked because, again, my hentai. In episode 4, after the escape from the school grounds and the somewhat uncomfortable bus ride, two of our main characters, Takashi and Rei, are on their own. Both we as viewers and both Takashi and Rei are given a brief moment of peace, although quite the eerie and unsettling one. The show cuts from shot to shot of the city the pair are riding through, and each shot makes sure that the bike Takashi and Rei are riding is present in some way, shape or form, be it visually or audibly. The subtle presentation of the bike works really well in contrast to the background of this city that is now without motion. So throughout all these shots, we're treated to this gorgeous a cappella piece, which is titled Oh Spirit. This track is beautiful yet haunting in its delivery of melodic and wispy vocals, and combine this with the surreal images of a city that is both literally and figuratively dead, and we get a really great example that High School of the Dead is more than just tits and ass. Placing this particular scene after 3 episodes of action is a great way to give the audience a breather and remind them that there's more to this constructed world than these kids just taking names. In the previous episodes, we do get some moments where we see characters begin to really take in exactly what is happening around them. In this scene of episode 4, it manages to extend those feelings to a larger scale. Even for just a brief moment in time, both Takashi and Rei feel as if they've become more grounded, and as if they're being reminded by the world around them that this shit that they've gotten themselves into isn't going to be easy. Although I do feel like the series quickly abandons that idea later on. It's a really good contrast against presentation that has otherwise been overall outlandish and pretty bombastic. And it breathes a heavy sense of humanity into the series and setting. This scene, coupled together with the soundtrack provided, managed to really show how devastating the virus in this fictional Japan has been. For decades, this was a city bustling with people and day-to-day activity. Fathers, mothers, sons and daughters all resided in this city, but now there's pretty much no one. And within these frames that we're given, we get to see that these people's lives were clearly interrupted so quickly and without warning that there was almost nothing that could be done to react. Again, we got to see this happen within the confines of the school. It's here that we as an audience really start to feel how large the scale of this infection has been and how many people it's actually affected. This is where I truly feel that the team for High School of the Dead, from the director to the storyboard artists to everyone in the sound direction to the people behind the OST themselves, had a really clear grasp on this High School of the Dead adaptation wasn't just going to be about running through hordes of the undead like butter and fat anime titties. There is, however, plenty of that. They decided to take the source material that they had from the manga and really look at it and say, how can we make this more than just everyday action? By making a scene like this and adding such an emotive piece of music to it, we get something that is not only visually stirring, but audibly stirring as well. And just for a brief moment makes us really feel that what we have in front of us is a lot more than some of the more outlandish things that we've seen so far. Show, don't tell is always incredibly important when it comes to any visual medium, and here I think is a perfect example of doing just that. So I really can't help but give props to the team behind all of this. High School of the Dead isn't a masterpiece. In fact, it's very, very far from it, and it has a lot of shortcomings and a lot of very valid criticisms that many other people aside from myself have pointed out before. But when I see people scoring the show 1s and 2s, it's never really made sense to me. There's a lot of things in this show that a very creative and dedicated team put into it to make sure that it wasn't just fan service, and that we as an audience got to experience a lot of really powerful and heartfelt moments with characters that we may not necessarily like or enjoy seeing on screen, but nonetheless, they're characters that manage to bring out the best in these emotions in a world that they once knew that is now completely torn to shreds. If this entire team of very creative and dedicated people knew that they were setting a series up for a scene in which a bullet flies through a character's tits, and they still managed to take a track like Oh Spirit and set it up with such fantastic and simple static visuals, and yet still managed to create such a sense of loss and sorrow, shouldn't then in turn these scenes be at least discussed when bringing up this series as a whole? And it's definitely not as if this is the only scene in which the series actually manages to convey proper emotion. In this case, this one just happens to be my favorite. At the end of the day, I'm just someone who enjoyed the series, everything, all of it. And there are parts of it that I love, and there are definitely parts of it that I hate too. But I think that if everyone can at least watch this series with a different eye a different headspace, and understand that from the source material that the team behind this managed to make something that is honestly a lot better than what it should have been. And a team of musicians were able to craft a sound for it that again was a lot better than what it should have been. High School of the Dead is trash, but it's good trash. And I think it's important that at least some of us recognize that and the parts of it that make it good trash. As an anime community, we tend to fling a lot of shit at a studio when they pack something full of fan service. But then we don't discuss when a studio at least tries to balance that out, or at least shows that they're trying to balance it out. Sometimes questionable presentation shouldn't completely overshadow what clearly has a creative, knowledgeable mind and skilled hands behind it. Unfortunately, in this medium, this is often the way it goes. I'll reiterate and say that High School of the Dead isn't a sleeper masterpiece that only my woke mind and third eye has been able to see, but these moments of greatness and delicacy have been severely overlooked. Call it just a guilty pleasure or say that I'm reading into it far too much, but High School of the Dead managed to draw more character emotion and empathy for a world than other fictional zombie mediums could do in like 8 fucking seasons. If that isn't impressive for a show that grabbed a target demographic of horny 14-year-old otakus, then fuck me dead, what is impressive these days?